Hey guys, quick heads up before I start the video. The link down below takes you to my Patreon, where you can download the project files for this video. Also gain access to my premium tutorials and in-depth courses where we build games together from start to finish. Check out my Patreon below, gain direct access to years of experience so that you can start working on your dream game tomorrow. Hello guys, and welcome back to a new episode of my multiplayer Bean Battle Royale tutorial series. So in the last episode we quickly fixed the thing with the widget so that we can now properly also use the widgets in a package build. So that basically concludes all of the basic setup. So now that we finally got our game going a little bit, we can start working on the very interesting stuff. So in this video we are going to be working on spawning the loot. So obviously in a battle royale, the players, they spawn on this little island over here. And then typically you would have your cool battle royale island like this. And randomly all over the place you would find loot. Now, what you can do is that if you look at like something like PUBG, you see that these guys have houses. And then inside of these houses, they got like different spawning spots. So basically you can kind of conclude that the whole house could be a blueprint. And then in that house blueprint, you basically got certain spots where they do or do not spawn loot. So that is one way to do it, of course. You could also just drop your loot out of the sky and make it drop with a parachute. Or you just spawn loot crates all over the map and just have players open loot crates like what you see in Call of Duty more to basically get the loot out of the loot crates. And since if we take a look here in the assets folder and props, since we got this cool chest over here, this basically loot crate, then what we're going to do in this video is that I'm going to set it up so that these loot crates randomly get spawned all over the map. And then I think in the next video we will basically start working on the player being able to interact with this loot crate, which would then open it up like this, and then the loot would shoot out of it. So when you open a box like this, there would shoot like 2 or 3 items like randomly out of this chest, and then this one is basically looted and that's it. So now what we want is that these loot crates are going to be able to spawn all over this map. So let's go ahead and get right into that and start building this system. So as we saw in one of the previous videos, we had our little actors folder here, and then we had our airplane. And then we saw that our airplane was responsible for spawning the players inside of a volume that we used inside of it. So here we got the airplane inside, and then we got this little volume here. And then we had a function set up, which we called spawn players. And what that basically did is that for all the players that we found in the world, we would find them a spot inside of this bounding box volume. So we would get this bounding box that we have over here, and inside of the volume of this box, we would randomly take one coordinate to spawn a player at. Then it would be the next player's turn. They would also get a random coordinate, spawn the player at, etc. So we're kind of going to do the same. However, what we do have here is a landscape, and that's the biggest challenge for this video basically. So what I'm going to do, what I'm thinking of making as a system, is basically putting a big box above the island, and then inside of that big box we will get a random coordinate. So we will get an X and a Y coordinate. So if we take a quick look here up, we see that our island is kind of square. So I'm going to put a square box above the island, get a random X and a Y coordinate, and then we will just say that we will spawn, let's say, 30 of these loot boxes. So I need 30 random YX coordinates. So let's say we got a coordinate over here, one over here, one over here, one over here. Then what we want to do is that at all those 50 locations, let's say that we spawn 50 or 30 items, doesn't really matter, then per location we want to do a straight line trace down onto the landscape, because yeah, we do have to deal with a landscape here. So we want to put a straight line trace down, and then at that location we want to spawn the chest. And then we also need to make sure that the chest actually kind of takes a look at how the normal of the world is. So it needs to align to the normal of the world. So what does that mean? If we have a big slope here and the loot crate decides to land on the slope, then it just has to stick to the angle of the slope as well. I think that would be cool. We could also just not do that, because you can do loot in so many ways. You can also just basically put spots all over the map where you would decide that there would be loot, so you would have more control over it that way. So you could basically just have an actor put it here, and then that actor would have a chance. So you could type in a chance, like this guy 60% chance for that, this guy 70% chance for that, and then you can just manually place them all over the world as well. But I just want to keep it simple here and basically have it all optimized. So I think that that first example would be cool for this series. So let's go ahead and right click click on blueprint class, actor, and let's call this BP lootbox underscore spawner. And then if we open this guy up, then we see here the viewport. So first of all, let's get ourselves that little box collision. So this one, and then the box collision, we are just simply going to make it so that it has no collision. And there we go. So what do we want this guy to do? Well, on begin play, we basically want to use that similar function that we used here inside of the airplane. So if we take a look here, we see random point in bounding box and a world location, and that's it basically. So we're going to copy these two functions, get them in here. So the world location will basically be here, the bounding box. So then for the half size, we're going to drag out of here and type in. So if we click here on the box, we see here that we have a box extent, and that's where we're going to use. So we're going to type in get box extend with a T, and then yeah, there's a couple of options. We can either do get skilled box extend, get unskilled box extend. So this one will basically return a vector to you. You can also just directly type in get box extend and then use this one. It's basically the same, but we're going to use the unskilled box extend. And then what we ask for here is half size. So if we basically drag off of here and then go break the vector, then we got to half all of these guys. So we're just going to type in divide by 2. And then we're going to split this like this. And the divided by 2 is going to go into there. So we're going to hook all of this up. Boom, boom. Hook it up here, hook it up here. So let's check if we actually do that correctly. So off of begin play, we're going to type in print string. And then let's go ahead, do it for 15 seconds. And we can then just append. And let's just do space bars in between here. Like that. So let's plug it all in here to see if we got the correct values here. So if we then go here, drag 1 into the world, doesn't really matter where. I just want to see the half printing. So yeah, it prints 16. Okay, so that's the correct type of logic. So then basically, now this is all good. So now what we need to do is that we then need to go into the world, and this loot spawner, if we drag it in, so I'll just drag in a clean one, we're going to set the location here to 0 and 0. And let's put it at a height of, let's say, 2000. It needs to be well above the landscape. So as you see, this would not be high enough. So then let's try 4000 just to be secure, because it also needs to be able to spawn it on our hills. So make sure that it is above the height. To be sure, let's do 5000. And then we're going to basically set the box extent. So with the actor selected, we can click on the box here. And then we're basically just going to scale it up until we think it is okay. So just going to eyeball it a little bit, because we do not want loot to spawn on the outer sides of the map. That's not for us. So let's just do it like this. And then we're going to copy over this number, put it in here as well. And then for the height, well, the height doesn't really matter, but we can make it something like a normal number. So let's do 500. Okay, so what is this volume? Well, this volume is our loot box spawner volume. So on begin play, this will basically have the opportunity to get a point inside of this volume that we declared here. And then in that point, we want to have 50 boxes that spawn, line trace straight down and spawn themselves on the landscape. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to have to now make a new actor. So we're going to do blueprint class actor. And this one is the actual BP loot crate. Then we open that up, go to the viewport here and add the static mesh. So for the static mesh, this is going to be basically the default scene route here. And this static mesh, we can rename it to bottom. And then we're going to select that one and also add static mesh. And then this one, we're going to rename it to lid. So that's the lid. And then the bottom, if we then do the chest here. So the chest is the bottom part. And then the lid is the chest lid. Here we go. Then let's put this in the right position, kind of. So I'm going to drag it up and turn off my snapping and then put it in its place. Just eyeballing it. It's not perfect, but it's fine. Okay, there we go. So yeah, if this opens up, is that all good? Yeah, that looks good to me. Okay, so this is our loot crate, and then that's the guy that we basically want to be spawning. So now that we got a loot crate, we can basically be spawning these guys all over the map. And like I said, they do need to align to the normal. That will be nice at least. So what does that mean? On this surface, it would basically be standing like this, and then the player can walk around up to this guy and basically interact with it and get loot. So now the question is, how do we actually spawn them? Well, there's going to be some crazy logic, but it's very simple in essence. So first of all, we're going to make a variable here. Click on plus, and let's call this amount of loot. And this we want it to be an integer, and then hit compile save. And now let's set a default value of, let's say, 50 loot boxes. Might be too much, but we will figure that out. Then on begin play, we're going to go off of the switch has authority, because we only want the server to execute this. We do not want the clients to also be spawning or attempting to spawn the loot. Okay, and then basically, so we need to do something the amount of times that we have loot. So what we're going to do is right click, or actually you can hold N and then left click in the graph to get this do N node. Now, if you cannot do that for some reason, you can also right click and type in flow control. And then if you type in flow control, then here you see the do N. So N, that stands for, as we see when we hover over it, executes an N amount of times. So basically, how many times do we want to do this? Well, we want to do it the amount of times that we have the loot. And then what we're going to say is that if the counter is equal to the amount of loot, at that point, we basically want to stop. So if this is false, if the N amount, if the counter is not equal to the amount of loot, then we're basically just doing it all again. But if the N amount is equal to the amount of loot, then we are done. So in between here, we are going to actually be coding our logic. So to do that, we're going to put this a little bit to the right here. So what will that logic be? Well, we're going to be putting it into a function. So let's just click on functions here, or actually we can also just select our code, right click, collapse it to function, and let's call this spawn loot. And this guy is going to go in between here, and there we go. So the first time we do spawn loot, then it's not equal to the amount of loot. So we do it again, and this will execute it then 50 times in this case. And then we're going to be working inside of this function. So now that we double click the function, then what is it that we want to do here? Okay, so first of all, we want to do a line trace down straight at that point that we find. So we find some kind of a point. So the point that we find, if we break it here, then we get an X and a Y. So that will be a 2D location. So it would be here, for example, or it would be here. And then at that point, we want to spawn a line trace that shoots straight down into the floor. And then once we got the line trace location that hits the floor, that's where we then want to spawn the crate. So to do that, we're going to type in line trace by channel. And then we get this guy. So line trace by channel is the node that we're looking for. Now, where we want to start is that location that we just talked about. So the location would be that X and the Y. And then for the Z, well, we could actually use the Z, but we do see that our volume is like a bit thick. So then it might be smarter if we make our volume less thick again. So for that, we select the box once again with the actor selected. And then let's just make this 100. So something like that would be fine. And then we can actually remove this guy and say that we use the X, Y, and the Z. So we get a random point here on an X, Y, and Z as the start location. And then the end location needs to be straight down. So how do we get a straight down line? Well, that's actually fairly simple. So we're going to drag out of the end here and then make a vector. And then for the Z, we're just going to type in something that is way below our world. So if we take a look at our landscape, we see that it's at 0. So if we simply type in something here like -2000, then that's basically going to be the end location. And then for the X and the Y, we're going to break this vector and get this same X and Y that we randomly found. So here we go. Then we're going to test this quickly. So we're going to open this one up, and then we basically want to draw for a duration of 5 seconds some kind of a line. So let's see what happens here if we now hit simulate. So up here, we're going to click simulate. There we go. So now we see 50 lines here randomly shooting down, and they are pretty close together, but I mean, it is all randomized. So if we try it again, let's see what happens. There we go again. Let's try it again. There we go again. So yeah, they are pretty close together, so you could actually increase your volume if you wanted to. You could also code some logics that you want the traces to be a minimum distance apart from each other, but still within the volume. So let's try it again. So there we go. Okay, so basically we get the 50 line traces down, and then let's try to spawn the loot at those locations. So to do that, we're now going to basically drag out of here and say if we have a valid hit. So we're going to branch off of here and say true. Then we're going to break the hit result. Let's open this up. And then here we get a location, and we also get a normal. And we also get the impact normal. So with that normal, we can basically determine the rotation that we need for our actor that we're going to spawn. So off of the true here, we're going to right click in the graph and then type in spawn actor from class and then attach it to the true. Now the class that we want to spawn is the BP Lootcrate that we just created. And then we want to spawn it at a certain transform. So out of this transform, we're going to click make transform. Now our scale is going to be 1. Our location is going to be this location, and then the rotation is going to have to be determined based on this normal. So the normal of the hit world, for example, the object swap. So if we just directly plug this in, then we can already see what happens. So right now, let's try and hit play. So there we go. So we see a loot crate here, which has a crazy rotation. And then we see all these loot crates that have now spawned, but they all have the wrong rotation. So how come they got the wrong rotation? Let's see here. So they need to be rotated 90 degrees on the Z axis is basically the conclusion. So if we go back here, then what we can say, we can drag out of this guy, break it, put this a bit to the right, drag out of this guy, break it, and then the X and the Y are fine. But yeah, oh no, actually, so look, so look, the green one needs to be rotated 90 degrees, and the green one is our Y. So it's not the Z that we want to rotate, but it is the green one. So back inside of our loot spawner, basically these cables go in, and then the green one, which is the Y, needs to be corrected. So if we drag off of the Y and do subtract, and then something like minus 90, then let's see if this does the trick. We hit play, let's find ourselves some boxes. And there we go. So now it seems like this did the trick. So all these boxes are now properly spawning on our landscape with the correct angles. Check out Cactus Center right now on Steam in Early Access. It's a very fun multiplayer video game, cheaper than the Starbucks coffee. So if you want to have a good time with your friends or strangers, click that link down below. And I appreciate every single one of you. And enjoy the rest of the video. Bye. Okay, so there we go, guys. So now we basically have the loot boxes spawning and they are all aligned to the world. So if we take one last look at the code here, then I'll go over it one more time. So we put this all the way to the right and this up here. So basically, what do? Well, on begin play, the server does something an n amount of times. So we set 50 amount of times. We can also click on this variable and click on the I here. If we then hit compile and save and go look into the world, then if we find our actor, so the loot box spawner, and then in the details panel, then here we can now easily adjust the number. So if we want more loot, we could easily adjust it. What we can also do is that sometimes there's more and sometimes there's a little less loot. So before we execute this logic, what we could do is that we can say that this number is going to be set randomly between a certain number. So to do that, we can drag off of here and type in random integer in range, and then let's say that at minimum we want 30 loot crates, at maximum we want 50 loot crates, for example. So if we do something like this and then hit compile, save, and then hit simulate, then we see that it now just spawned a couple of loot crates and not as many as before. And now obviously in real games this would be way more advanced, because what we see over here is that we have something like water, for example. So in real games like PUBG, we would have to take this to another level. And basically what we would need to do is that if we hit play, so this one here is a good example. So if we got this one, then we see that the line trace basically hits the water and now it just spawns on the water. Well, first of all, that is because we have never set our water to not have collision. So if we click on our water, we see that that's this plane here. And then we can basically say, okay, let's have the plane first of all not have any collision, right? Then if we hit play, let's see if we are lucky again. Yeah, so now one guy was basically shot into the water here. And you see that he is actually underneath the water. So what you would do in a real game and in a real scenario is that you would have that line trace, which we see over here inside of this function. You would basically have the line trace detect what type of actor or what type of physics material, in this case, more specifically, it would hit. So if the line trace would hit something like water, then we can say that in that case, we would execute it one more time for this function. So in the case that we hit something like water, then again, so that we try to not hit water. And then we just keep trying until we not hit water. And then we say, okay, that one counts. We take it. And then the N executes again to go on to the next crate that it has to spawn. So there would be all types of additional logic like that, of course. But in essence, if we just go over it once more, so what do? On the server, we spawn an X amount of loot, so it's randomized, and then we basically see that that X amount of times we basically execute this function called spawn loot. Now, what does this function do? So first of all, it gets a random point inside of this box that we have declared over the map here. So we got this big loot spawner box here for us. And then what do we see? Well, we basically take a location as the start of the trace, then that same location, but then 2000 meters below the world, so 2000 meters down, we do a line trace. That line trace then hits the surface of the landscape, and then we spawn a loot crate at that location where the hit is registered, and then we basically take the normal to determine the angle of the landscape so that we know what the angle of the loot box should be. We correct that angle of the loot box because we saw that on the Y we had a little correction to do, and then we spawn our little loot crate there. So then if we hit play, we see all these boxes hitting, and then we got these guys that are perfectly aligned to our landscape. So now we need to basically make sure that this also works in multiplayer, which is very simple. So for multiplayer, we already see that this logic only gets executed by the server and that an item spawns. So the only thing that we need to do is that we need to ensure that the item that spawns, which is the loot crate, is actually replicated. So if the server spawns replicated items, they will automatically also appear for all of the clients. So if we click on the little search icon here, then that brings us to the actor of the loot crate. Then if we open this actor up, then all we're going to do here is replicates true. And then we hit compile and save, and there we go. And then yet again, since we are working with a battle royale, you might not want this loot crate to have this net culling distance, which means if it is 150 meters away, that is this current value, then the client won't basically see it as optimization. So if you want the client to always be able to see it, and if you have a map that is not too big, something like this, and is doable for the server to basically always replicate, then you could consider turning these loot crates on to always be relevant, or you just increase your net culling distance, for example, or we just keep it as it is right now, and then it just culls as well if necessary. So now let's go ahead and actually properly test it with 2 players. So we're going to do 2 players, listen server. Then we see that we got the 10-second countdown. We put the server to the right, the client to the left here. So now we're about to go into the airplane. So here we go. Both beans are in the airplane. Let's look over the edge. And then the loot should be all over the map now. So on the left we got the client. We're going to jump out. And then we're going to be parachuting. And let's find ourselves some loot. So here we go, for example. So here we got a beautiful loot crate that we find, and they're all over the place. And then on the server here, we're going to jump out as well. Then we're going to have to find our client. So I believe there on the client, we see us jumping as the little server bean. And then let's see if we see all of these loot crates at the same location. So here we go. Yeah, so both the client and the server see exactly the same loot crates at the same location. We also see these 2 over here, for example. So if the client also goes over here, then there we go. So now we got fully replicated spawning of loot crates. Alright guys, that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to be looking at how the player can interact with these loot crates, and then how the loot crate can actually shoot out the loot. So it will shoot loot in different directions, basically, just like we see in Fortnite. And then the player should be able to pick that loot up. That will then be in the next episode after that one. And then the player will have the opportunity to basically grab a gun, shoot a gun, reload, and start killing other players. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please be sure to check it out on the Patreon. You can download the project files there if you want to mess around with the project or make changes yourself, etc. Appreciate you guys for watching the video. Hit the like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!